I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. It is really a great pleasure to introduce Katherine Chia and Arjun Desai to our School of Architecture. I would say in a world where architects are increasingly cynical and short-sighted, where the goal for building is often a self-serving one, Kathy and Arjun's work stands out to me as optimistic and generous. Theirs is an architecture that values craft, experimentation, serendipity, and poetry. Arjun Desai grew up in New Delhi and Mumbai, received his BA from Bennington College and Master of Architecture from MIT, and prior to founding Desai Chia, worked in that August New York City firm, Swanky Hayden Connell Architects, right? Doing civic work and projects on the East Coast. And Kathy Chia got her BA from Amherst College and her MArch from MIT, coincidentally. Prior to founding their firm, she worked for Maya Lin on many art and architecture projects. And she taught at Parsons, or she has taught there for 7 years, I think you were saying, although that was a few years ago, and is currently active in the AIA. She's a board member and treasurer for the New York AIA. Arjun and Kathy opened their eponymous practice in 1996, and the work is exceptional. It's been widely published internationally in pretty much every place you can imagine. Residential design, interior design, Metropolis, Dwell, Dezeen, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Architect, The Plan, Casabella, the list goes on. They've had a lot of awards from the AIA, from the American Architecture Awards, Interior Design Best of Year Awards, and notably they've won an AIA Institute Honor Award, which is the highest award you can win from the AIA. And in 2018, I think, Architect magazine had ranked them the number 19 nation in the country for design, which is pretty good for a small firm, pretty extraordinary. I think their work is notable for its formal restraint on the one hand and professional prowess on the other. In many ways, I see them as an heir to a powerful modern legacy that has often been misunderstood. In privileging expressive reticence over and above the gratuitous manipulation of form, it underlines the serendipity of atmosphere and social occasion, their temporal condition highlighted against the prime canvas that is their buildings. The myriad of carefully wrought details eschew self-celebration in favor of directing one's gaze towards a larger phenomenal perception. At the same time, their buildings maintain a strong presence, adding a sense of grace and wonder to their respective circumstances. I think theirs is an exceptional practice, a practice whose accomplishments span across the scales architecture operates, from landscapes to buildings to interiors to materials to details. Always beautifully sited and carefully wrought, simultaneously light and massive, the work carries this modern legacy well, from a guest house in upstate New York that floats magically over the landscape to a levitating yet massive roof cantilevering towards or on the shores of Lake Michigan, to a bending wood veneer to define a custom light fixture. The work is a study in contrasts, a dialogue with presence and a forthright enthusiasm for structure and making to elevate, and I guess I mean that literally and phenomenally, their buildings and to continue that modern legacy with aplomb. With that, please join me in welcoming Kathy and Arjun.
Sorry, I've got to get the AV system going here. So thanks, Kevin. That was really such a lovely and generous introduction for us. I really appreciate it. It's really an honor to be here. We're really grateful to be welcomed by all of you. So my name is Kathy Chia. I'm one of the partners at Desai Chia Architecture. We're based in New York City, near Union Square, and my partner is Arjun Desai in the corner there. So Arjun and I, just to let you know, we are a husband and wife practice. We have a small firm of 7 people in New York City. And the reason I give you that context is because we went to MIT together, worked in New York City, got married, have 2 kids, have the office. So there's a lot that's intertwined there. But I want to take you through our practice, our work, just to give you an overview of who we are and what we do. So beginnings and influences. So as Kevin mentioned, we're really, I guess, coming out of a modernist kind of philosophy. When we were in grad school, influences from sort of the classic modernists were really part of what we were looking at and studying. But I feel like our work is really meant to be an evolution and a continuum of that. So we try not to get caught up in baggage. We try not to kind of rely on things that are just, beautiful and, clearly thoughtful and have a strong philosophy. We don't want to necessarily mirror that. We want to kind of evolve it and learn from it and use that as a jumping off point. So just to give you some background, Arjun grew up in India. Corbusier was actually a big influence for him. Projects in India that Corbusier worked on, Chandigarh in particular, where he lived for a period of time. For me, I grew up in a house that was designed by an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright. It wasn't designed for my family, but my parents loved it, bought it, and I grew up in that house. So the materials and texture of the Frank Lloyd Wright philosophy really influenced how I think about architecture. Both of us love the work of Lou Kahn in terms of the kind of pure structure and the meaning of light within his work. And then also Arne Jacobsen, thinking about how interiors are equally as important as the architecture in the building. It's all kind of married together. So we really think about our work as an intersection of architecture, landscape, interiors, lighting, and even art. Art has definitely influenced our practice. I was a fine arts major when I was an undergrad at a liberal arts college before I went to grad school. Arjun also studied art when he was an undergrad. And we like to use art as a way not only of inspiring our work and themes in our work, but also as a way of explaining ideas to clients, because we find that a lot of clients are really connected to the art world, or they just really love themes from art. And that gives them sort of an access way into architecture, which sometimes can be, I think, spoken about or described in ways that are a little bit too kind of removed from what most people feel as a comfort zone. So we found that art is a really good way to kind of bridge. So works by James Turrell, Donald Judd, Louise Nevelson, Richard Serra. These are just some of the many artists that we look at. But we also look at art through a cultural lens. So for example, a Chinese landscape painting can inform us on how to think about a landscape view or moment and capturing an experience. So as I go into some of the projects, I want to give you kind of a little bit of a lens into the DNA of themes that have evolved over time in our practice and things that we care about. So raw and refined. So we like to think of materials in a way that allows the materials to be celebrated, whether they're kind of raw, rough, in their pure form, or in the way that we manipulate them. So the use of materials and kind of the way to understand them through the use of light as well is very important in our work and the way we think about architecture. So you can take a tree, trees that we use in our built environment, and then think carefully about how do those singular elements or that kind of species contribute to a project. So as a starting point, this is an apartment in New York City. Apartments in New York City tend to be the bread and butter work for a lot of small firms. And we are no exception. The first 10 years of our practice, we were doing a lot of apartments, but we tried to think about them as a marriage of architecture and interiors. So in this case, it's a 3-bedroom apartment. It happens to be for a family from Texas. They're based in Dallas, but they wanted a pied-à-terre in New York. So we designed this home, but with the theme of a single species of wood that would kind of drive through the experience in a way to calm down the home. So when they come to this place, it's an oasis. But yet also to think about textural themes, the way light can activate material, to think about light and shadow. There were also some other subtle themes built in. The family has 3 children, so we came up with this notion of kind of the growth of the family and the trees branching and these 3 prongs that ended up repeating themselves throughout the spaces. So when you first enter the home, there are these volumes. They're sheathed in this American white oak. We have a seating bench when you first enter. And then those elements start to transform as you move around them. So at first glance, you see the volumes. Then you start to move and you see that the volumes open up and they become shelving on the other side and they become screen walls. even the light fixtures, which we ended up developing with a firm that we collaborate with on various projects. It's called Stickbulb. They make fixtures for the mass market, but they were game to work with us on a custom fixture. So we said, you know, the New York City apartments, the older ones generally have slab ceilings. You can't chop into them to get recessed lights. How do we get a low profile fixture that can do multiple things and relate to the materials that we're kind of focused on? So the notion of editing down even a light fixture to the use of a singular material, but that using that to kind of express across the apartment. So from the living room, you can look back onto a shelving unit. Lights are embedded. It kind of glows as a sculptural piece. And then beyond, you can see the kitchen. Right behind the stove, there's also a wood element. We used porcelain planks at the cooking area so the wood wouldn't get burned. But you know, we tried to kind of weave in a singular material in a way that would craft the space. So a built-in bar area, a small little seating desk. So these small moments actually activate larger spaces. So the idea of playing with scale is also really important. A view of the kitchen. Even the light fixture, which we worked on with a light artist, becomes this manipulation of the material. So it's almost like taking the material and seeing how it can express form, light, texture, and then various details. So the craft for us of architecture is not only about the big picture moments and the big concepts, but it's also about the crafted materials and those levels of detail that sometimes you only notice it as you get closer and closer. So light and the lightness of living. So light has become one of the tools in our toolkit of ways to inform and express architecture. We've always thought about architecture as the marriage of light and materials. And just to bring you back to kind of our early years, so this was actually the very first loft project we did in New York City. It was two artist spaces that were combined into one. And the woman who bought the two spaces, she just wanted a big, open, almost like art gallery experience. So it was a very pared down loft. We angled the ceiling and bounced light into these wedge-shaped faceted forms. We used concrete, wood, but it was incredibly minimal. The apartment was then bought 17 years later by a different owner, a woman who's a photographer. And she initially called us and said, I was wondering if you could add a powder room into the loft. And you know, powder room seems like a small project, but this was our very first project from 17 years earlier. So we said, let's just do the powder room. You know, we really care about this project. And as we started to talk to her about her needs, we realized that the apartment we had designed for somebody else really wasn't a good fit for her. So we talked about what she really needed. And little by little, she opened up and said, yeah, I'd be open to you coming up with new ideas for this home. So she's a photographer. She has gallerists who come in and meet with her about her work. So we created this entry so it could have a library component so she could meet with gallerists, bring her work out. But within the apartment, we also have these moments of light. Some of they were existing from the previous renovation, and some were new moments. So what's shown in yellow are these kind of like almost stitching together of light and shadow moments throughout the space. So the gallery or the gallerist experience when they first come in, they're seeing work that she can pull out off of the shelves. She also happens to collect Donald Judd furniture, which was a big plus for us because we love Donald Judd's work and it looked great in the space. But we tried to play with translucent and transparent. So the panel on the far right is actually a translucent frosted glass. The panel behind the bookshelves is a anodized aluminum. So the light will bounce across these materials in different ways and sort of activate the space differently between day and night. The light, as it pushes through into her photography studio, also activates in different ways. So the panel that I just described to you that's frosted from the library, sort of gallery reception area, pushes through and into her photo studio. So when the lights are completely off, like in the image on the left, it's this very powerful, dramatic experience. Then when she turns all the lights on, the light is complementing the soft light that she needs to work. And then the materials also help to warm up the space. We designed these magnetic walls so she could pin up her work. And then in her kitchen area, as you swing around to the more public places, we tried to push this notion of light and shadow with dark elements. So we took raw steel and used that as the shelving for her island. And then in the backsplash, there's also a raw steel panel that's lifted off of the main backsplash. It's got a light detail around it. So the notion of taking materials, layering them, and then layering light between them became a strong theme. And then even in the smaller moments, this is a moment within a guest bedroom area, just to be able to take a simple cabinet, but carve out a shelf moment, have a light detail behind it that rakes across the back of an anodized aluminum panel, gives these little accents and drives that light theme through from the big picture to the small. So the notion of taking materials and crafting them in bespoke moments also became a moment of experimentation for us on this project. Her bathrooms were sort of these chambers of light. We used a marble on the floor, and then the rest of the bathroom is actually Corian. So on this project, we kind of went to town with Corian, but we really wanted to manipulate the material and treat it almost like a kind of monolithic surface. So the beauty of Corian is that you can actually fuse it and get rid of all the seams. So we really thought about how this could be kind of an all-encompassing moment of light. So the Corian actually helps to kind of reflect the light around in this very soft, glowing way. And then we were able to take the elements of the bathroom, the vanity, the bench, a peek-through moment between shower and vanity area, and just kind of let the light and shadow activate that. So another theme in our work that we've explored is the idea of turning things inside out and this connection between landscape and architecture. So for this next project, which is the LM Guest House, it's a guest house in upstate New York, we sort of thought about it as Mies meets barn, or Mies meets cabin. So it's sort of this notion of a refined, elegant space that has strong connections to the outside between indoor and outdoor. But then the notion of these Dutchess County barns, where you get these kind of raw barn structures that let the light in this sort of screen-like way, and the texture of the wood and the patterning of the light coming through. We kind of wanted to marry those two experiences. So this project had an incredibly thoughtful structural system, and I have to give Arup, the structural engineers, credit for this. They came up with a concept with us for 4 posts supporting a large steel frame for the roof. So it was almost like a large tabletop. The roof was kind of like a large tabletop. And what we loved about that was that it was really the minimum amount of material used to create the maximum amount of structural expression in terms of these big, large cantilevers that would hold up the roof. It allowed the entire facade to be essentially a curtain wall. So there was really no load coming down on the glass, so the glass could be more free, and we could really wrap the house entirely with glass. So the property is about 360 acres, so we really wanted the landscape to actually be the artwork in the house. We felt like the landscape really was the most powerful experience, and if we could wrap it around the house and bring it in, that would really kind of work well with the client's goal of being in kind of an open-air pavilion in the woods. One thing I should say about this, a little backstory, is that this client was interested in us. They were also interested in John Pawson. And we were kind of like, all right, you know, we were young at the time and thought, you know, how are we going to win this one? So he told us that he contacted John Pawson. And John Pawson said, well, I'm in like the south of France in the Riviera. I have an exhibit here. If you want to work with me, why don't you come to the exhibit and we'll chat then. Then the client called me and said, well, John Pawson says he's in the Riviera. You know, what about you guys? I said, well, we're literally 5 blocks from your current apartment in New York, so we could just meet you at Starbucks. You could come to the office. We could come to your place. But we're easygoing. You know, you don't have to fly around. They really appreciated that. So I'd like to say we got the project because of our design prowess at the time, but I think we also got it because we were flexible and we were willing to do whatever they needed to be available for discussion. But this client was really thoughtful. They really thought hard about the experience of being on the property. They didn't want a big home. They said, you know, we have this, actually I should take that back. They had an idea of taking a Pennsylvania Dutch barn and turning that into a large home. But they said, let's try living in a smaller size guest house first, and then we can work on this larger home. So we designed this guest house. It's essentially has one main bedroom, 2 bunk rooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen, living space. And they loved it. They loved it so much that they decided not to build the main house, which I would say maybe did us a disservice. But we're grateful that they went ahead with this project. So the model that you see was a series of explorations that we did, but this was the final model where we showed the client you know, how the space would work. We also did a whole sustainability study for them. So what you don't see in the house in the end result is the fact that it has geothermal heating and cooling. There's a photovoltaic component. We reclaim the water for irrigation. And we did a lot in terms of studies of sustainability for prevailing winds and how to ventilate the house using natural ventilation. So the details of the house include this kind of raised plinth for the floor, and it's raised in 2 levels. So the first is a concrete plinth, a raised slab, and then the second is actually the raised wood floor. It allows for heating and cooling to happen both from above and below. We have these sliding panels that allow for privacy, and then this large curtain wall that basically wraps around the house. This is the master or main bedroom. We have these sliding panels that shield you in terms of privacy, but when you want, you can have basically the entire facade open up. A view out to the pond. And I should also say that we tried to do as many built-ins within this project so the client really wouldn't have to bring in a lot of furniture. The idea that it was almost like a kind of like a self-sustaining kind of experience, and they just show up with their toothbrush. When they come up with their kids, the kids each have a kind of a bunk room, and within the bunk room there's a little study nook. So when they were younger, they would actually come up and do their homework here. And the guest house has these bunk beds, which were built in, and the idea was that it was very flexible. So the clients live in New York City. This is their weekend home. They bring guests up. It's kind of a little bit like camping, but the house has all the conveniences that they need. And then the view out to the pond again, the kitchen, sheathed in corian. I think the idea was really to just allow the landscape to be the art experience, the art moment. So that image that I showed at the very beginning of that Chinese landscape painting was really about that kind of connection, how to idealize a landscape, but in this case, this is the natural landscape that came with the property. And a view from the outside. And then a view at night. So the idea is that it becomes a lantern at night, and it becomes almost like a light box on the property. So another theme in our work is the notion of flipping things upside down. So I guess that's a broader theme in terms of releasing some of the baggage that one can often carry forward, and we try to think about each project in a fresh way. So sometimes we have to really shake out things that we might make assumptions about. We try to edit. We try to be really thoughtful about kind of looking at things through a new lens and educating our clients and bringing them along to see things in a new way. In this case, our client came to us for a house in Montauk. This was a summer home. They actually, at the time, lived in Dallas full-time. And as we talked to them about the house, we realized that when you're at an oceanfront or a property that's close to the beach, you really want to be elevated and up. You want to get the natural breezes. You want to get more of the view. And these lots in Montauk are not that large. So this one was about 1/3 of an acre. So you do get neighbors that walk by. So we said, if we bring you up to the 2nd floor, you'll get this living room experience up there, almost being in the trees. And you'll get more privacy. You'll get the breezes. So we literally brought the living room and all the public experiences up to the 2nd floor. So in this model, the model on the left is showing you kind of the service workhorse areas, the bedrooms, the mechanical spaces, And then the image on the right is showing you this kind of like, almost like a lens, set of binocular kind of viewfinder element that snaps into the front of the house and kind of gives you this view out towards the ocean. So this is the view from the house looking towards the ocean side. The upper deck is essentially an extension of the living room, dining room, kitchen experience. So I'd say 3 seasons out of the year, they spend as much time outside as they do inside. It's almost doubling the amount of social space that they have. Upstairs is also the primary bedroom and 2 studies. Downstairs are the kids' bedrooms and a family room. So the other side of the house has a different, very different attitude. So this is looking up the hill towards the neighborhood, bringing light in, and this kind of play and the moment where we've kind of carved out an outdoor deck. That outdoor deck is between the 2 private studies, one for the husband, one for the wife, and it's the place where they meet. So the kids can't get there without going through a study, but it gives a little bit of a secret private moment for them. And as we studied the house, we looked at the prevailing winds. We also looked at the orientation for the PV panels to take advantage of using a solar array to generate power. So while this house is connected to the grid, it can be completely off the grid when needed. And I think that for the client, the ability to ventilate the house without having to rely on air conditioning, that was a priority for them, and we really tried to make that work and be very thoughtful about it. The other thing is these big cantilevers are meant to be almost like big visors, shielding the solar heat gain from inside and allowing the interiors to be fairly cool all year round. So as you move from ground going up to this upper deck moment, this staircase, this wedge piece kind of takes you up. And then once you're on the deck, you are elevated off the street. There's a really large oak tree that we preserved and is up against the house. And to sort of be in this treehouse experience, embedded in the branches, was one of the themes we really wanted to make as a memorable experience. And then to be able to go from inside, outside, and vice versa. So in most of the seasons, they can really treat the outdoor space as an extension of the indoor. And from the inside, this is their living room, with a kind of a built-in element that allows them to have a bit of a wet bar. And then the views out to the dining area and showing kind of the extension of kind of looking over the neighborhood to the ocean. So the materials that we used on the outside of the house, we also brought inside. And then it's an interesting play when you work with craftspeople. So the person who made the cabinetry really tried to mimic the color of the material we were using outside, but did it with a totally different species. So this idea of kind of playing with color, tone, material grain was another piece that kind of played into this project. The house is also incredibly durable. So beach house gets pretty beaten up over time. So we used end grain floor as a material that's still warm and inviting, but the end grain is much more durable than the face grain. So just kind of testing out different materials and learning about how they perform over time is really important. I think in the notion of sustainability, durability is an important component in thinking about sustainability. This project is also what we call an upside-down house. It's in Shelter Island, and the contractor who built that house that you just saw in the previous slides asked us to design his home. So it was kind of a very amazing compliment, actually, to be asked by a builder who could have chose anyone in the Hamptons to design his home. But he asked us, and we said, sure. He loved the idea of the upside-down house, but for slightly different reasons. His property is on the edge of the Mashomack Nature Preserve, which has a lot of indigenous osprey and other kinds of plants and flora and fauna. So we really wanted to give him an elevated experience, a small touch on the ground, so the ground would be kind of very lightly impacted, but get him up high so he could see out over the preserve and see the native osprey in their natural habitat. And then the notion of the osprey, they live up on these perched platforms and trees, kind of taking that concept, that experience of the osprey, and bringing it to this house of being sort of elevated and up and connected to the sky. So these two models, the one on the left is a study model of the structure. The one on the right is more of a massing model. We wanted to take the roof form and kind of push it up, because one of the interesting aspects of, I think, any project is kind of how you site it, and how you site it for sun, wind, views. In this case, we had the option of siting it facing either east or north, and we wanted to take advantage of both of those. The north view is actually overlooking this marsh, and the marsh is actually a glorious place. It transforms over the seasons, but facing north, there was no direct sunlight coming in. So the way this roof is formed, it takes advantage of southern sun coming over the top of the ceiling and kind of pushing down into the spaces. What it also does is the southern sun then lights up what's in the northern view. So when you're sitting in the house looking north, everything is lit up in the distance. So we try to think about, how these sort of natural phenomenon can impact the experience of the architecture. So the house is 2 floors, slab on grade. The lower level has 3 bedrooms, a family room, and an entryway. Then you pop up the staircase and you're kind of in this large vaulted space, living, dining, kitchen, a large open deck, and then a media room and the primary bedroom suite. So this moment of light pushing in from the south through this long clear story window basically brings light down into the main living spaces in this sort of wafted way. And then from there, you look north for the views. So this is a view from across the marshland area looking back at the house. We wanted the house to be tied to the trees and embedded within this marsh experience. We wanted it almost to be disguised. So as you approach the house, we have a carport area. We decided not to do a garage. We wanted to have as much open air moving underneath the house as possible and keep like a light presence on the ground. But the faceted roof forms help to bring the light through, but also craft these sliced moments of views out to the marshland. So when you end up going up to the second floor, you have this beautiful view out to the marsh. You're kind of up like a nested osprey in your perch. And then as you move inside, that same experience travels with you. So the expression of the structure on the inside of the building also helps to bring the light in a kind of dappled way. It sort of breaks up the harshness of the light, and the warmth of the wood actually helps to warm up the light even more as it's coming in. A view of the kitchen. So the client does a lot of kind of family entertaining. So we wanted this island to be something sculptural, but also be very practical in terms of like a big buffet layout. So the idea for the kitchen was it was a kind of sculptural backdrop for the living space, but also very active and functional. And then this view from the media room, there's a long vertical window that kind of grabs the verticality of the trees as you look out towards the marshland. So at night it glows like a little kind of sliver of light, but just these little surprise moments. I think what's interesting about architecture, I think, is its power to renew the soul and its power to give you kind of a new experience either during the course of a week, over the course of seasons. So creating architecture that allows the building to marry with the site, marry with the elements, but then give you surprises. So we try to think about that as we craft spaces in our work. This is a view of that connecting stair from lower level moving up to the public spaces. The notion that the stair can be a gathering spot, also practical because there are a bunch of drawers that pull out of this stair for various kinds of storage. So the islands, bugs, and huts concept for us is all about integrating the ecosystem and thinking carefully about being a steward. How can you think through the ecology of a site and be a site steward? And site stewardship becomes very important in terms of how we think about the muscle of buildings on a property or on a site. So this project is on the Leelanau Peninsula in Michigan. This is an area in northern Michigan that has a huge bluff line, but the bluff is eroding. So the image on the left shows you how like chunks of the bluff will actually just like spall off and head into Lake Michigan. Our client bought a property from a cherry tree farmer. So the cherry farms are located in this peninsula, but cherry farmers often don't want the section that's right up against the bluff because they want a buffer between the cherry trees and the water. So our client bought this long swath of property, and we told him that we can certainly build on it, but we want to be really thoughtful about how we do that. We do not want site degradation. We don't want erosion. So this view, which is off of the what we call the Vista Terrace, which is at the end of his living room, we wanted to make sure that that view is preserved and that the house itself could be kind of like a performative piece in terms of site protection. So we did that by studying the volumes of the building and the program of the building as a series of connected elements, but each element, clusters of bedrooms, clusters of living room, dining room, kitchen, each element has almost like a cupped hand experience. So we're basically holding the rainwater and the storm water, getting it to scuppers that then go down, drop the water down into dry wells and cisterns, and move the water away from the site. So we are really thinking carefully about how does water move around, and how can we be thoughtful about taking that water and moving it responsibly off the site. So instead of water just going towards the bluff, which happens in this area, and then the water erodes the bluff, how do you think about moving it away? So you can see in the distance, there's the islands in the distance. We also wanted to give the client the experience of being connected to those islands, because he had told us that growing up, he would come to this area with his family, and there's this whole sort of lore about canoeing out to the islands. So we wanted him to have that visual connection and think about how to frame these moments of the house to connect back to the islands. So another aspect of this house is the structure. So we ran the structure the short direction, and as these pitched moments kind of carry the water through, the structural engineer actually wanted us to turn the beams 90 degrees. He said, no, I want them to go down to a ridge beam, and we said, no, we want the beams to run the short direction of the roof and almost create like this enfilade, or a bit of a kind of like a layering, weaving aspect to the roof. And we pushed him, and he finally did it, and he was kind of amazed by the results. And what I think is fun about working with consultants that are willing to push and pull and tussle with you is, as long as people are willing to listen and try something different, you can get some surprisingly unexpected results that are often more powerful than if you had just gone with kind of the tried and true kind of basic result. So I find that our collaboration with our consultants and also with architects around the country has made our work a lot better. This particular project in Michigan, we collaborated with Ray Kendra of Environment Architects out of Traverse City. Whenever we do a project that we have to hop on a plane to get to the site, we like to find a local architect that can partner with us and be a collaborator. So Ray was great, brought some amazing artisans to the project. So I would say, as you all go out in your career and work on different projects, think about that team around you. Think about who you want to be surrounded with, push them, and get them to tussle and kind of fight the good fight with you, because it really can make a huge difference. So on this project, the exterior of the house was something that we were sort of toying with in terms of different kinds of materials. And the client, this was back in 2014, the client had read an article in the Wall Street Journal about this material, this method of charring wood in Japan called shosugiban. I think now shosugiban is very, very commonplace, but back then in 2014 it was not. So the client sent us this article, and at the time we actually had a project in Singapore. So we were going to Singapore, we were going to stop off in Narita Airport for a layover, and we said, let's extend that layover for a week, and let's go around Japan and look at these buildings that have this charred facade to make sure it's really going to be a durable material that's appropriate for northern Michigan. Well, it turns out the latitude of Tokyo is almost the same as the latitude of northern Michigan. And as we looked at these projects, we realized, okay, these old Japanese houses that have been around forever, they're surviving, they're doing well, they deal with freeze-thaw conditions, and the wood, the way it's charred, is absolutely beautiful. So we contacted Delta Millworks, which is just down the road here. At the time, they were one of the few producers in the country that were experimenting with Shosugi-ban. And we spoke to Robbie Davis, who's the owner, and said, you know, would you be up for doing a project with us in Michigan? And he said, yeah, sure, we've been doing stuff locally, but you know, we'd love to work with you guys. So they produced a series of charred samples for us, and we decided to go with the second one from the right, which is what they call a half gator. So it's pretty charred. I mean, you can rub your hand on it and the charcoal comes right off. And the client was game for it. So we really enjoyed like developing that methodology with Robbie and his team. The other component of our experience with wood on the site was that the site is basically like a forested edge. Ash trees, which were native and old growth to the area, had been devastated by the ash borer beetle. So if any of you are from the Midwest and sort of the Michigan, Chicago area, you'll know that the ash borer beetle has basically eaten its way through most of the native forest there. So I think there were over 100 trees on the client's property that were infested with the ash borer beetle. There's no pesticide for it. There's nothing you can do. It basically, the beetle eats the bark and that suffocates the tree. So the client was ready to take these trees to the wood chipper. And we said, please don't do that. Why don't we reclaim them and see what we can do with the wood in the house? Now, at the time, we had no idea what we were going to do with this wood. But we figured out a way to reclaim the wood, dry it, use it for furniture. We used it for flooring. We used it for trim work. We used it for the wood ceilings. So we really wanted to honor the old indigenous forest and basically allow that to live its second life in the home. What was really lovely was that the team that we worked with that reclaimed the wood and dried it out, they were so inspired that they started to tell people in the area about it. Our clients started to tell people. So I'm hoping that we were able to play a small role in perhaps just allowing this wood to find a new life through furniture architecture in the region. But it was important for us to think carefully about how to imbue the house with the character of the site. So this is a view of the ash wood. It's used on the floor. We made the dining table out of it, the ceilings. And I mean, we love wood in sort of a very kind of refined look, which you saw in the very first project. You know, American white oak, rift and quartered, amazing. This ash wood was very figured. I mean, it was like zebra striped, but its personality came from the site. And so for that reason, we felt like it was a really appropriate look, and we went for it, and it's really kind of like given so much personality to the house that's part of the site. And you can see the Shosugi-ban is married to that as well. So this contrast of dark and light and playing off these textures and materials, allowing the wood to express its grain pattern, these are the kinds of things that we've sort of really looked at carefully, come to appreciate, and love to express. So there are various other rooms within a home, and we like to think of outdoor rooms as being an additional room to an experience. So garden spaces, outdoor moments become part of the architecture. So this client, they own a gallery in New York City. So the art component was very important. Their property in Roxbury, Connecticut is actually very close to Alexander Calder's estate. So he created sculpture in Roxbury, Connecticut. So these rolling landscapes became a theme. His studio has this big backyard that it's a giant meadow that rolls away. We thought about that because our client has the same experience. We also thought about the Storm King Art Center, which is not too far away, that also has the same experience. So the house, we decided, could be a series of these offset volumes that create courtyard moments that become outdoor rooms for art. And in studying the volumes of the spaces, we looked at the way that the roof form would start to undulate and open up views, bring sunlight in, create moments of dark light and shadow. And then in the building sections, we tried to study how these courtyards would intersect and interrupt the volumes, but become important rooms on their own. So this pushing and pulling, the tugging of these buildings back and forth, but this interconnected roof form sort of connects all of the circulation experiences. So when you first enter the main courtyard, you're drawn in through a series of live edge stones. You drop down into the courtyard. The client has plans to bring in outdoor sculpture from various artists that they represent. They represent Latin American artists, contemporary Latin American artists. So the walls of this, the two hallways are sheathed in handmade tiles from Mexico to be a sort of textural backdrop to the artwork that they can also display in the hallways. So as you move through the courtyard, you start to experience the birch trees that are coming from the site, and on uphill, the birch forest kind of like merge down and move through the courtyard spaces. So the art becomes integral to the house. So it's part of even basic experiences like moving through a hallway. And part of the entry sequence where you can sit and take off your shoes, but you can also have the artwork displayed there. And then different views from the house, we tried to allow views to be layered and see indoor and outdoor spaces as a series of glimpse moments as well as broad moments. And then even small details like the client's desk, we wire brushed the wood out. So you get this highly raised grain and then stained it. This notion of the handmade, so the sculptures that are on the desk are by an artist that the gallery represents. So we wanted this notion of like the handmade working of materials to be expressed in the architecture and the interiors. So the living room moment, the sculptural aspect of the fireplace, because I think fireplaces, what's challenging for them is when they're not being used, they can sometimes look like sort of the deep black hole. But we wanted a piece that would bounce the light across and create kind of play of light and shadow. So it's got a series of faceted angles within the fireplace. And then we have a series of hanging rails throughout the house so the client can display artwork. In this case, these are large tapestries that an artist made, and they were able to display it in the home. The home was really meant to be an extension of their gallery in New York. There's also an artist in residence component that they discussed with us. So we have a guest house where an artist can live and work. And then the property, which is 12 acres, can be used for outdoor sculpture. So the views out from the living room, the big meadow area, which we see eventually as being almost like the Calder Estate or Storm King, where a series of large outdoor sculpture could start to unfold. So now I want to just take you quickly through some other types of projects. So I've shown you a lot of residential projects. We've done work for commercial clients. And for these clients, what we try to do is think about them and also the people who work in their spaces. So how do you capture the personality of a company, especially one that is sort of evolving and growing? So this is Spark Capital, based in Boston. They asked us to design a New York headquarters for them. But at the time, they didn't really know how they were going to staff it. But they talked a lot about being an incubator and helping smaller companies grow. So we thought about this sort of garden in the sky. They took a penthouse space that had a large skylight. So we treated this almost like a Villa d'Este kind of garden experience. And the notion of screening and bringing light through and giving them the flexibility to use the space in many different ways. So the central space becomes almost like a Pechacucha place where they can host big events, cocktail receptions, launch products. And then the screen elements becomes a place where they can grow their plants and kind of screen people. And then these elements move back and forth. So this whole screen system actually comes apart. So you can reconfigure it in different ways. And then the skylight moment, so pulling the light in and washing the space, but letting the elements within the space get activated with the light. And then once they decided to move, this was several years later, we realized the company had evolved and they had really grown and matured in ways that were pretty powerful. They incubate and work with really large companies. So we thought about this notion of the Japanese garden and how you can take a theme like dropping a stone into a puddle of water and watching the ripple effect, which was essentially how this company was kind of affecting their industry and the tech industry. But in a Japanese garden, when you rake the sand, you get this kind of like idealized, almost architectural version of that theme. So we took this notion and kind of turned it into the interior experience. And we even designed these custom light fixtures. So the notion of rippling waves through this screen wall, the ability to see through. So from the public spaces, the conference room spaces, you can get a glimpse into the workhorse of the office space and vice versa. And this notion of transparency was really important. And making this with a group of craftspeople in Brooklyn, a company called Elephant's Custom Millwork. We developed these light fixtures and played with that. So another theme in our work is that we know that people are quirky, and we really try to express that whenever we can and kind of identify how people might want to sort of change their behavior in a work environment. So instead of giving them a static space where they have to conform, we like to talk to the people who are actually working in the space, get their feedback. And in this project for a company called Quartz, which is a media company, we took a lot of their themes and put it into this kind of what we call a word salad. And then we also took this Polynesian map and explained to them that within a space you can have these kind of moments that are glitchy, that are unexpected. So the feedback we got was makerspace, people love plants, people love to read, and people love to make drinks and have fun. So we kind of took those and used them to infuse what we call the quartzy zone in the middle of the space. So in addition to all the functions you have to do to actually work, sitting at your desk, going to meetings, we wanted to kind of give people the flexibility to take a break and have different kinds of experiences in the space. So this is the quartzy zone. It moves through, it undulates back and forth. There's a library, a cafe, a maker space, a meeting space. And what's nice is that over time, people have started to use these spaces for meetings. So people will book these areas to actually have their meetings because they find them to be more relaxed, more inviting, and a chance to kind of think differently than being in a typical conference room boardroom. We made the shelves so that they can be disassembled and moved around. People can bring their own kind of accessories in and display them. So it was really about thinking about how this company could allow its employees to kind of give the personality of the space back to them. This is their library space, the maker space, and their cafe space. It's in an old building that has a lot of historic detailing to it. So we took the molding of the kind of outside of the building and crafted that into the shelving spaces. So this last project is about keeping the old but reimagining the new. It's a small project for Columbia University, but I think it shows kind of how you can take even the smallest spaces and kind of give them a new personality, and then that can actually be a catalyst for other things. So we designed this not this makerspace, we designed this gaming space. It's a gaming lounge for Columbia University. And it was interesting to interview because neither Arjun nor I do any gaming. So we had to learn from the students and really understand what this was about. But the most important thing for us was that we didn't want gaming in isolation. We wanted to be able to pull kids out of the dorm room and game together and be in a social environment. So everything we do is really thinking about community, collaboration, and a socially kind of like engaging experience. So we created a space that allows the students to come together, even though they're gaming at their individual computers, they are still in a kind of team environment. And we worked with our lighting consultant who basically tricked out the room so that the light can be programmed to different levels, different colors. There's a video feed that can go through the lighting. So the notion of taking what is embedded on the computer screen with gaming and bringing it into the architecture, the excitement of what's happening on the screen becomes kind of part of the theme of the architecture, was really important. This space also is kind of a booming space. So we have a series of faceted panels that are actually acoustical panels. So thinking about how the architecture can respond to what's happening in the space in terms of sound reverberation was important. This is in one of the oldest dorms at Columbia. So we kept the old architecture kind of as the patina and the shell, and we just thought about these new insertions. So with the perforated metal, we were able to create moments of light. And then students can come in and basically be engaged in this experience. So I guess the 10th and final point for us is making the most out of the journey with every project. It's often exhausting to be an architect. It takes a lot of stamina, it takes a lot of patience. But the one thing that I think is maybe pretty unique to our profession is that you're always learning something new. So I would say as you move forward in your careers, to think about how you can always learn something new, find something exciting about every project and every client, and use that as the springboard going forward. So I would like to thank our clients and collaborators, because without them, these projects would never occur. And we've been really grateful to be able to share a long journey with them. Thank you. Sure, happy to take some questions.